Let us get a few things crystal clear, and let us try very hard to run away from shallow-minded and shallow thinking analysis of our situation in Kenya today. Let us get things into the right perspective concerning this Maandamano. Just imagine for a minute, Raila Odinga did not exist, okay? And the problems that are going down in Kenya, were going down. The situation is exactly the way it is. What do you think would happen? I assure you, it would take a very short time for the country to move into anarchy. Why? Because people are hungry. People can't afford a meal for themselves and their families. And then when they look into the media, you are appointing 50 CAS appointees, each earning over 700k per month, without counting the allowances and the other benefits, like grants to buy houses, to buy vehicles, etc., etc. Politicians completely oblivious or completely ignoring the situation of the masses. That produces a human being who turns into something else, almost an animal, because they have nothing to lose. That is the truth. Bottom line, so when Raila calls for demonstrations, peaceful picketing is actually saving the country from anarchy. Whether you like it or not, whether you think that is a fact or not, it will remain a fact. Think about it. Point number 2. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua tells us that yesterday during the Maandamano, the shutdown of Nairobi, the country lost about 2 billion Kenya shillings. Okay. How much does the country lose in corruption per day? This is very interesting. Actually, almost 2 billion per day in corruption. So let's look at this with wisdom. Is there any problem transferring the 2 billion, which would have lost anyway in corruption yesterday? Is there any harm in transferring that 2 billion towards fighting for a better Kenya? You tell me. Because yesterday we lost 2 billion. But we also saved 2 billion from corruption. There's no corruption going on because everything was shut down. You know, when you hear people saying, Wakenya wamesoma mpaka wakakuwa jinga, the truth is they're not far from the truth. That is the truth. Because you can see that clearly in the way some Kenyans, very well educated, in very good schools, universities, we can see the way they argue. Wamesoma mpaka wakakuwa wajinga wa mwisho. They cannot see anarchy coming unless the problems, very pressing problems, facing the vast majority of Kenyans are addressed, and they're addressed quickly. They can't see that coming. All they want is peace, for them to continue making money, living comfortably in their air-conditioned apartments. And their education tells them that the walls surrounding their apartments are high enough, secure enough, electrified to keep out hungry, starving Kenyans when they reach their end. If that is not stupidity, then I don't know the meaning of that word. You see, we have become a very short-sighted society. My late political lecturer, may continue resting in peace, taught me some basics in human behavior, human nature, and politics that I've held very firmly to, and I've found to be true right across the board, over all these decades since I learned those lessons. Please allow me to retell a story that I've told here many times before, but is now especially relevant. At the height of the battle for the second liberation of Kenya, when there were anti-government riots against the government of Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, the riots and the protests got so intense that I got very excited. And I blurted out to my political lecturer, the way things are going, I'll be surprised if Moi is not gone next week. My political lecturer's response shocked me. He said, my son, I am very disappointed. All that money I've paid for your school fees, taking you to the best schools I can possibly afford. Kumbe, I wasted that money. Oh yes, my late political lecturer could put you down very, very emphatically. That was his nature. So a bit embarrassed, I sat back and waited for him to explain. And the man had drama in his blood. And he knew how to pose for effect. And that pose was long. He lit his embassy cigarette. He slowly poured out his white cup beer, took a long sip, and then sat back on the chair. And before he spoke, he ran his right hand right across his scalp to the back of his head. And then he pointed to his tummy and he said, all politics is centered here and nowhere else. And the reason why Moi will not go in a hurry is very simple. It is centered around here, pointing to his tummy. And then he continued, despite the hard times we are passing through, at that time like today, Kenya was passing through very serious economic difficulties in the 90s. Despite the hard economic times, Moi is taking every opportunity to put money in the pocket of wananchi. Moi is ensuring that nobody is going hungry. You have seen in the media so many trips to Kambani and other areas of Kenya, taking relief food, supervising the distribution of relief food himself, using intelligence officers to ensure that there's minimal corruption in the distribution of relief food, etc., etc. When people are not hungry, removing Moi will be almost impossible. And I'll be very honest, at that time, I looked at my political lecturer and I said, this old man is losing it. It cannot be as simple as that. I was proved wrong and was proved right. I was very wrong because after we had that conversation, Moi ruled Kenya for another 10 years. And he only left power in 2002. Voluntarily. Nobody removed him. From that basic truth, it is very clear, and you should be able to see it, that the situation in Kenya today cannot be sustained for much longer, with or without Raila Odinga. In fact, the truth is, Raila Odinga is protecting you, who is criticizing him. Raila Odinga is protecting you, you dear sycophants, from the wrath of the people when it comes to you uncontrolled. That is the reality. So, please, let us use just a little wisdom in analyzing the events of yesterday and the long-term impact on Kenyan politics. The Kenya Kwanza government played very smart yesterday, and the police played very smart. They kept Kenyans away from accessing the CBD. They blocked all entry points into the CBD. They blocked Raila Odinga and Azimio from accessing the CBD. Very successfully. Yeah, let's just say the truth. Of course, that move was very unconstitutional, because our constitution, enshrined in our 2010 constitution, is freedom of movement, freedom of association, picketing is allowed, you can protest, air your views, etc., etc. But let us put aside our constitutional rights for a minute and continue to analyze what happened after this. Very many Kenyans, despite all this, were able to access the CBD, and there were demonstrations within the central business district of Nairobi. Admittedly, the crowds were not as large as they would have been had the police not blocked people from entering the CBD. Very clearly, Kenyans are very determined. For people to force their way into the CBD, those are very determined people. Yeah? Determined to do what? Determined to prove what? Hold on to that thought. It will become obvious in a little while. In the efforts of the police to block wananchi from even leaving their homes, in slum areas like Kibra, Mathare, etc., etc., they were running battles that resulted with the police. And very interestingly, and very instructive, in a lot of these battles, the police were not able to withstand the numbers, the sheer numbers of determined Kenyans. There were instances where the police were outnumbered and had to run for dear life away from the wananchi. In one very hilarious encounter, police in a vehicle were forced to shout the Azimio slogan, "Ruto must go." Yeah, they were forced to do this so as to enable the huge crowd, hostile crowd, to allow their vehicle through unscathed. It was more than hilarious. Cops chanting, "Ruto must go, Ruto must go." Now, after Raila Odinga was completely unable to access the CBD, blocked by the police, his convoy with the other leaders snaked around the CBD and went to the Isli Juja Road area, where they addressed very enthusiastic and determined Kenyans in some very memorable speeches, which are available online. And Raila announced that the demonstrations will now continue every single Monday without fail. In other words, every Monday going forward will be a public holiday, as per Raila Odinga Gazette notice. Now, of course, this address to the people was interrupted on a few occasions by the police anti-riot trucks. They're trucks with water cannons, which were jetting out water with such high pressure that they were knocking off their feet some of the demonstrators. And here is where some of the protesters tried to hit back. They threw stones, they threw all manner of things towards the trucks in a bid to stop them, which was not entirely successful, but hindered the police in one way or another. For instance, it made it very difficult for these trucks to keep on moving forward, when all kinds of missiles are flying at you. Now, we need to be careful here. The international media was capturing all this. And we know that water cannons are dangerous. They've resulted in deaths in other parts of the world, in fatalities. Sio maji tu, these things are dangerous, because the pressure with which that water comes out is deadly, can be deadly. And this is being directed at peaceful demonstrators, peaceful protesters. This is a crime against humanity. In case you didn't know, somebody can take this to the ICC, for instance, and get a hearing. Water cannons are supposed to be used as a last resort, against people who are being violent, demonstrators who are destroying property, etc., etc. These demonstrators were just peacefully listening to Raila Odinga. And although it is not right that they threw stones and all kinds of missiles at the trucks, the truth is they were provoked. And by the way, these water cannons caused damage to some of the businesses that were in this particular vicinity, where the police were trying to break up the crowds. Now there are those very impatient Azimio supporters who were very disappointed about yesterday. For instance, some of them felt the demonstrations should have continued for a few days to bring the government to its knees. There are those who felt that since the demonstrators did not access State House, the whole thing was a failure. Now this is where the character of legend patriot Raila Odinga kicks in. Because if the demonstrations continue for a few days, the people who will suffer most are the ordinary folks. You'll not be able to access food, for instance. Because supply chains were not working yesterday. Everything in Kenya was at a standstill. Imagine that happening for 4 days continuously. It would be disaster. In my opinion, this is proof that Raila Odinga is wise and is not hungry for power immediately. Of course, some people criticize him for this. They say he's not hungry enough. And a person who's not hungry enough for power is unlikely to get it. And there's some truth in that. Unfortunately, but we need to recognize the human part of Raila Odinga. And in any case, the objectives can still be met with demonstrations once a week. Maybe later down the road, if need be, it can be increased to twice a week. If the Azimio fellows feel that once a week is not enough. Bottom line, we will still get there. Azimio will still be able to meet its objectives. And I believe the objective of a vast majority of Kenyans to get a change of guard in Kenya. It will still work, although it will take a much longer time, but it will still work. But now comes another danger I see here, because the hungry, vast majority of Kenyans are already very impatient. The danger here is that the people can take this over. And of course that would mean total chaos. No control, no caring for anything. That is how bloody revolutions unfold, as we've seen in other parts of the world. And so, even as Azimio take a lot of criticism from short-sighted people, paid people, people who don't understand, watu ambao wamesoma mpaka wakakuwa you know what, they still have to be careful not to try the patience of their supporters. They have to be very careful about that, because the danger is real. It is very real, and it will affect all of us. Whether you're a UDA supporter or not, it will affect me and you and everybody, and not in a good way. Let's face reality. Now let's take a moment to look at what was happening on the government side. Clearly, the government is in panic. The tactics being used against Azimio protesters is clear evidence of that. The body language of the leaders is clear evidence of that. The way the leaders have changed their story. Now words like negotiating are creeping into their vocabulary. Have you noticed that? I don't know how long it will take for the government to realize that it is impossible to rule people who don't want you. Even a military dictatorship has to be very careful. Yeah, if people don't want you, kwisha maneno. It's just a matter of time. And this is a truism of this life, right down the history of mankind. Yeah, but of course we have some people in Kenya Kwanza who want to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, so let's see how far they go with that. My hope is that today in this video, I've given you a very in-depth analysis of what happened yesterday and the political implications going forward. Now, before I go, I need to remind you of my latest WIB offer. We have WIB number 102 in the works. Yeah, that includes a lot of behind the scenes manenos from yesterday, yeah, which I hope to release the day after tomorrow. However, the bad news is that my very special offer, yeah, the Mapabano WIB offer, will not be available the day after tomorrow. Indeed, it is ending today. Yeah, so please rush and take advantage of it. You can see details on your screens right now. All for a better Kenya. Folks, please, let's not be short-sighted. Let's have the vision of a giraffe. Because you may be very comfortable today. Maybe even you have a government appointment. Maybe you're a CAS. Money is not an issue for you. Yeah, and going forward, money will not be an issue. But think about your children and the days, the weeks, the years, the decades to come. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.